its 70th anniversary, so it has been operating since 1955. And before we start with the regular papers, I would like to play a video presentation about Tucci to you by Professor Luca Maria Olivieri, professor at Ca' Foscari University, Venice, and the director of the Italian Archaeological Mission. So let us play the video, please.
Please, our media team, but apologies that I missed the fifth presenter of this session, Dr. Teach Huang Yen. Please play the video.
It's a great pleasure to be invited to give a paper in this third international conference on the Buddhist heritage of Pakistan. And we'd like to extend our grateful thanks to the conference secretariat and everyone involved in the organisation of the conference. The aim of this presentation
A warm welcome to all participants at this international conference, the third conference on the Buddhist Heritage of Pakistan, held at the Quaid-e-Azam University in Islam. A special welcome to all the scholars, the organizers, and everyone who has attended this rich program full of inspiration and thought. On the behalf of the Italian Archaeological Mission in Pakistan, which I direct, I would like to thank you for the founder of our archaeological mission, which last year marked 70 years of uninterrupted activity. Today, as in the past, we are engaged in numerous excavation, research and propagation activities, and I hope you have the opportunity to visit the ongoing excavations at Barakat and other sites in Swat, as well as the new excavation at Sirsa, Taxila KP, where archaeological research has resumed after more than a century of silence. This is now possible thanks to the new Kaber Path project, implemented like all our activities in full collaboration with the Directorate General. A warm welcome to all participants at this international conference, the third conference on the Buddhist Heritage of Pakistan, held at the Quaid-e-Azam University in Islam. A special welcome to all the scholars, the organizers, and everyone who has attended this rich program full of inspiration and food for thought. On the behalf of the Italian Archaeological Mission, which I direct, I would like to thank you for dedicating a session to Giuseppe Tucci, the founder of our archaeological mission, which last year marked 70 years of uninterrupted activity. Today, as in the past, we are engaged in numerous excavation, research and publication activities, and I hope you will have the opportunity to visit the ongoing excavations at Barakat and other sites in Swat, as well as the new excavation at Sirsa, Taxila KP, where archaeological research has resumed after more than a century of silence. This is now possible thanks to the new Kaber Path project, implemented like all our activities in full collaboration with the Directorate General of Archaeology and Museums of the Government of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, to whom we extend our deepest gratitude for all they have done and continue to do to protect the cultural heritage of ancient Buddhism in Pakistan. Giuseppe Tucci's role in the study of Indian and Himalayan Buddhism, stemming from his extended stays and expeditions in India, Nepal and Tibet, both before and immediately after the Second World War, is internationally recognized and needs no further emphasis. Given that the conference will focus extensively on manuscripts, it will be worth briefly recounting the role Tucci played in saving important manuscripts from Gilgit from being lost. These were stored in the Bunji archives near Gilgit and were taken from there by a colonel during the First Kashmir War. Having learned of their existence and of the attempt to sell them abroad, Tucci, in agreement with F.A. Khan, the great first director of the Department of Archaeology and Museums of Pakistan, acquired them and immediately freed them. Aspects of archaeological research must be emphasized here.
PowerPoint, please. Can I have the light off? One more row. Thank you. Very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, scholars, and distinguished guests. Today, the topic that I would like to share is Buddhist Vinaya in Gandhara Buddhism, the Dhamma-Guttaka Vinaya and transmission to China. The Vinaya is the core Buddhist canon governing the monastic law and institutional structure. Historically, the transmission of the Buddhist texts from the Indian origin to East Asia, particularly in China, was the multifaceted process involving translation, interpretation, and adaptation. This process was shaped by linguistic challenges, cultural negotiations, and the evolving needs of diverse Buddhist communities, resulting in variation and localized form of canonical texts, including the Vinaya. Understanding the Dhamma-Guttaka Vinaya's transmission thus provide key insights into the dynamic of Buddhist texture, preservation, and transformation in different cultural contexts. So the timeline of the establishment of the Vinaya is as follows. The 5th century BCE, Buddha established the Kamavachana, that is the formal monastic procedure system. 4th to 3rd century BCE, Buddhist school emerged and each developing its own Vinaya tradition. 1st century BCE to 1st century CE, Karma Vachana text began to be written down in writing. 1st to 2nd century CE, Gandhara Karma Vachana manuscript fragment appear. 2nd to 5th century CE, Karma Vachana traditions of various Buddhist schools become stable and standardized. 5th to 7th century CE, the gilded manuscript preserved large collection of Karma Vachana texts. Until now, 15th to 21st century, the modern scholarship began comparative studies of Karma Vachana manuscript and Vinaya tradition. This study seeks to examine the historical trajectory and mechanism through which the Dhammaguptaka Vinaya was transmitted to China. The central research question guiding this inquiry is, how was the Dhammaguptaka Vinaya transmitted to China? Addressing this question is essential for several reasons. First, it sheds light on the modalities of Buddhist textual transmission. Second, it enhances understanding of the formation of Chinese Buddhist monastic. Third, this investigation contributes to the broader discipline of history of Buddhism by elucidating the intercultural exchange and historical contingencies. Dhammaguptaka Vinaya is one of the major Vinaya traditions transmitted to China. In Chinese translation, it's called Si Fen Lü. Reason for the name because the text is divided into 4 parts, hence this is the title. Historical context is translated to the Chinese during the early centuries of Buddhism's transmission to East Asia, and it became the dominant Vinaya tradition in China, Korea, and Vietnam. To this day, ordination of Chinese Buddhism, including Mahayana monasteries, follow the Dhammaguptaka Vinaya. The Dhammaguptaka Vinaya school emerged as distinct Buddhist sect in the centuries following the Buddha's parinirvana. Its Vinaya text codified a detailed system of monastic discipline. The school extended geographically into Central Asia, particularly Gandhara, which became an important center for Buddhist learning and textual production. The Dhammaguptaka Vinaya became the standard monastic discipline in East Asian Buddhist communities as well. So it regulated food, dress, behavior, and ritual practices, contributing to the institutional consistency. This Vinaya tradition accompanied the spread of Buddhism to China, Korea, and Vietnam. The adhere to the Dhammaguptaka Vinaya enable cohesive monastic structures and ethical framework across region. Moreover, it emphasized on communal harmony and discipline conduct shape the normative ideals of Buddhist monasticism. All right. In Chinese Buddhism, the Dhammaguptaka Vinaya became the standard for the ordination and monastic discipline. Other Vinayas are translated into Chinese as well, but they did not become the normative code in East Asia. In Tibetan Buddhism, the Murasavastivada Vinaya is the authoritative code, and this translation were crucial in transmitting Buddhist monastic discipline across the culture. When Buddhism first entered China, there was no formal ordination ceremony. In 250 CE, during the Chao period, the Indian monk Dhammakara translated the Bhikkhu Vinaya precepts at White Horse Temple in China. This marked the beginning of ordination in China based on the Buddhist monastic rules. Later, in 254 to 255 century, the Parthian monk Dhammatratta translated the Karma Vachana of Dhammaguttaka Vinaya, so which introduced a more complete and formal ordination procedure based on the ritual acts. During the Eastern Jin dynasty, 317 to 420 CE, the monk Dao An promoted strict observance of monastic discipline and established formal practices such as uposatha, that is the confession or posada, and repentance rituals for the monks and nuns. At that time, another monk, Dhammagupta, set up an ordination platform on a boat on the Sea River. 4 nuns from Luoyang's Chuling Temple, including Jinjiang, received full ordination. They formed the monastic community. So this event is known as the boat ordination and is considered the beginning of nuns ordination in China. However, some scholars argue that this ordination was not fully complete because only the monks' community was present without the participation of both monks and nuns. Therefore, it is considered an incomplete form of ordination. The first fully valid dual Sangha ordination for nuns in China is said to have taken place in 434 CE. At that time, the nun called Hui Guao and Jing Ying from Jingshu Temple received ordination at Nanning Temple from both monks and nuns brought from Sri Lanka. So as we know, the introduction of Buddhism in China is generally dated to the Han Dynasty. It's around 206 BCE. The transmission occurred through Silk Road network, through monks, traders, and pilgrims. Both overland and maritime roads facilitated this process. Translation posed a major challenges requiring adaptation from Kharosthi and Prakrit into Chinese, and the interaction with Taoism and Confucianism led to the reinterpretation of Buddhist teaching. The Central Asian monks such as Dhammarasa and others play key important roles in early transmission. A major milestone occurred between 410 to 412 CE when Buddha-Yasas and Zhu Fonian translated the Dhammaguttaka Vinaya Shi Fen Lü in Chang'an. The evidence supported to a gradual land road transmission rather than a single event. Researcher Herman stated that the first Vinaya texts entered China through Northern Land Road from India, and that this research for disciplinary texts peaked in the early 5th century when 4 complete Vinaya Shi Fen Lü were translated into Chinese. The Dhammaguptaka Vinaya became the standard monastic code in China. It was integrated with Mahayana ethics and Buddhist Sava precepts. Monastic centers in Luoyang, Nanjing, and Dunhuang play key roles in it. Dao Xuan's commentaries further consolidated Vinaya law in China. This codification stabilized Buddhist monastic discipline for centuries. Gandhara Buddhist manuscripts were discovered in regions such as Taxila, Swat, and Peshawar Valley. These beachbark scrolls date from the 1st century BCE to 2nd century CE. The manuscripts include Pratimoksa, Vinaya Vipaka, and Skankata. This is also shown in the regional variation in the Vinaya rules. The Kharosthi script was widely used in the Gandhara for the Buddhist texts. Its disputes align with the Dhammaguptaka activity. So the Kharosthi inscription contain Vinaya-related terminology such as bhikkhu, pratimoksa, and sila. These align with Dhammaguptaka textual tradition. Philologically, analysis showed that the parallel with canonical Vinaya formulation. So these inscriptions function as instrument of monastic governance and doctrinal dissemination. Kharosthi evidence support transmission through Gandhara and Central Asia. It highlights the institutional and cultural transmission process. This is Kamavachana text in Kharosthi manuscript. Many schools have this kind of Kama anthology, example Theravada, Savastava, and Murasavasti Vada. Each school have their own content and context of the Kama. And this is the Chinese 四分律. 4 parts. The first section explains 250 precepts that bhikkhus should follow. The second part explains the 348 precepts for bhikkhunis, the nun, as well as the 2 kantahas on ordination and recitation of the precepts. The third part includes 15 kantahas from the Pravana Kantas. This is to the Dhamma Kantaha. The fourth section contains the kantakas on daring the miscellaneous matters, together with the chapter on compiling of scriptures, settlement of disputes, and additional Vinaya material. In summary, the Dhammaguptaka Vinaya reached China through complex intellectual route. Its transformation to the 四分律 reflects both continuity and adaptation. Kharosthi evidence corroborates the textual and historical data. In conclusion, the transmission of the Dhammaguptaka Vinaya into China was not merely the movement of religion texts, but a transformative process that profoundly shaped the foundation of Chinese Buddhism. Through its systematic monastic regulation and ethical framework, the Dhammaguptaka Vinaya established a stable structure for Buddhist communities. It influenced the ordination practices, temple governance, and daily monastic life across China and later throughout East Asia. Its enduring legacy can still be seen in many contemporary Buddhist traditions today. More broadly, the history of its transmission reveals the dynamic nature of Buddhism as it moved across cultures, languages, and civilizations. The adaptation of Vinaya texts demonstrates how Buddhist teachings were preserved while also being reinterpreted to meet new social and cultural contexts. This process of intercultural exchange highlights the flexibility and resilience of Buddhist tradition, showing that the spread of Buddhism was not a simple transfer of doctrine, but an ongoing dialogue between India, Central Asia, China, and the wider East Asian world. The direction for future research are further interdisciplinary work in epigraphy, philology, and ecology is needed. And also the comparative Vinaya studies may reveal further insights and facts of the history. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much again. We proceed then with our next paper by Professor Keith Lattick about perspectives of Buddhist spirituality in Gandhara encounters and reflections.
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank you for the invitation here. But I'd like to, I'd like to start, well, I have two confessions that I'd like to make before my lecture. The first is that I'm a refugee from Central Asian Studies. So I'm come to Gandhara via Central Asian Studies. And secondly, that I've been thinking a lot about Gandhara, and I've probably been thinking about Gandhara probably about the last year or two. And the question that I keep asking myself is, why did Gandhara happen? Was it an accident of history or a logical result of intellectual and cultural cross-pollination? My lecture today focuses on two interrelated themes that illuminate one of the most transformative periods in Buddhist history, what I refer to as the Gandharan spark, the moment where Buddhist art, culture, and spirituality fused with Hellenistic and Persian influences, and the nature of spirituality in Buddhism, both in Gandhara and more broadly. For me, these two themes are inseparable. The Gandharan spark was not merely an artistic innovation, it was a spiritual solution to a representational and devotional challenge within early Buddhism. First, I'd like to set the stage as Gandhara as a spiritual crossroads. Gandhara was a region with intense cultural interaction. It was shaped by constant interaction, borrowing, and a shared history, rather than a rigid separation. This multicultural environment, Greek, Persian, Indian, Scythian, created the conditions for more profound spiritual and artistic transformation. But before I examine the spark itself, we must understand the problem it addressed. And for me, it's the spiritual problem of representation. Early Buddhism was aniconic. The Buddha was not depicted in human form. Instead, symbols such as footprints, the Dharma wheel, or an empty throne stood in for his presence. This symbolic approach reflected a spiritual concern. How do you represent someone who has transcended physical existence? But as Buddhism spread and devotional practices deepened, this symbolic mode became insufficient. Mahayana Buddhism emphasized a more personal, devotional relationship with the Buddha. As such, a devotional religion requires a devotional object, a face, a body, a presence. And this is where Gandhara intervenes. The Gandharan spark. It's the fusion that changed Buddhism. What was the Gandharan spark? It was a profound, transformative spark of artistic and cultural fusion that occurred when Greek, Persian, and Indian traditions collided. This spark did not merely blend styles, it solved a spiritual crisis. The Greek settlers brought with them a long tradition of anthropomorphic gods and naturalistic sculpture. Their artistic vocabulary made it possible to imagine the Buddha as a human being, not just a symbol. In other words, Greek influence sparked the first human depictions of the Buddha. As you know, this was revolutionary. For the first time, Buddhists could look upon Buddha's face, serene, compassionate, idealized, and form a personal, devotional connection with the Buddha. There are also Persian and Iranian ritual forms. Persian architectural traditions contributed square shrines and circumambulatory corridors. These forms support ritual movement that embodied spiritual progression. And third, we have Indian iconography and marks of enlightenment. The Indian traditions that contributed, such as Ushnisa, Urna, and other markers of enlightenment, these ensure that the Buddha's human form still conveyed his transcendent nature. That's why I view the spark as a spiritual accelerator. Unfortunately, when I'm representing this slide, I had a table in my paper which I didn't reproduce here, which I apologize for. But I could summarize that fusion as the following. Greek realism brought a personable, relatable savior. Persian ritual forms, they delivered a sacred, spatial practice. And Indian iconography gave divine meaning within the human form. This synthesis created a new spiritual language, one that made Buddhism visually accessible, emotionally resonant, and culturally adaptable. The result was a humanized Buddha, calm, compassionate, idealized, who embodied enlightenment in a form that could be viewed and you could become emotionally attached with. Like, why was this possible? And I argue, I borrow some theory from psychology, and in my paper I argue that the multicultural cities created social affordance. And that's a psychological environment that encourages creativity, exposure to diverse identities, lowered functional fixedness, and I define functional fixedness as a cognitive bias that prevents using objects in a new or unconventional way, limiting them to their traditional use. This enabled artists to reinterpret traditional symbols in a new way, in a new light. This multicultural exposure made Gandharan artisans and thinkers more willing to experiment, to reinterpret, and to innovate. In other words, Gandhara's diversity, it wasn't just demographic. It created cognitive generation. There's also another aspect is about spirituality in Buddhism. To understand why the Gandhara spark mattered, we must first understand what spirituality means in Buddhism. In my paper, I argue that spirituality is protean, and that's shifting, adaptable, like the sea god Proteus. It's not a fixed doctrine, but a transformative way of life. In other words, spirituality requires a challenge, commitment, inner transformation, the dissolution of ego, and a connection with something greater. And this closely aligns with the Buddhist goals of mindfulness, non-attachment, wisdom, and the realization of true nature. When I address spirituality in Buddhism, Buddhist spirituality is different from many religious traditions because it's non-theistic. And in other words, there is no creator God. The self is not a permanent existence. And the ultimate goal is nirvana, the liberation from suffering. Spirituality in Buddhism is therefore experiential rather than doctrinal. It is realized through meditation, ethical conduct, insight, and the Noble Eightfold Path. My paper also, let's see, spirituality. Oh, give me my little. I also, in my paper, I address architecture as spiritual technology. And in Gandhara, it became spiritual technology. The stupa evolved from a simple mound into an elaborate narrative monuments. And the surface that gave for carvings that guided the worshiper's journey. In other words, these reliefs were not just decoration, they were visual sermons. And monasteries were designed to move both practitioners from secular to the sacred space. Their architecture intentionally shaped spiritual experience. I noted in my paper that Gandharan architects borrowed from Zoroastrian fire temples, integrating square, circular, ambulatory corridors. In other words, architecture is pedagogy. In Gandhara, architecture is taught. It's structured in movement, perception, and devotion. It was a spatial embodiment of the Buddhist cosmology. I go on then to look at the spirituality, why these spirituality innovations were especially powerful. A human Buddha did not replace doctrine, it supported it, making enlightenment feel attainable. And how did the Gandharan spark reshape Buddhist spirituality? The Gandharan spark transformed Buddhist spirituality in three major ways. First, it humanized enlightenment by giving Buddha a human face. Gandhara made enlightenment relatable. Devotees could visualize compassion, serenity, wisdom embodied in a human form. It also enabled devotional spirituality. That this visual representation of the Buddha allowed for a more devotional spirituality, which in turn appealed to diverse ethnic groups. And lastly, I think that this is the part that ties all our papers together, is that it made Buddhism mobile. Images travel more easily than abstract concepts. Gandharan art became the visual language that carried Buddhism along the Silk Road into Central Asia and China. It wasn't just artistic, it was missionary. To conclude, the Gandharan spark was a moment when art, culture, spirituality fused together to solve a profound representational challenge in Buddhism. It produced the first images of the Buddha, reshaped devotional practice, and enabled Buddhism's spread across Asia. At the same time, Buddhist spirituality, non-theistic, experiential, and protean, provided the philosophical foundation that allowed these innovations to flourish. And I think this is probably one of the most important points that, like in my conclusion, Gandhara shows us that spirituality is not static. It evolves through cultural encounter, artistic creativity, and the human search for meaning. And it reminds us that sometimes the most transformative spiritual insights emerge not from isolation, but from an encounter. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We continue with the paper by Professor Ruth Young, delivered online, which is co-authored with Professor Shakirullah and Dr. Abdul Samad. The title is Gandhara, Pakistan and Anuradhapura, Sri Lanka, a cross-cultural comparison.
It is a great pleasure invited to give a paper in this third international conference on the Buddhist Heritage of Pakistan, and we'd like to give thanks to the conference secretariat and everyone involved in the organisation of the conference. The aim of this presentation is to stimulate some critical thinking about the material culture of Buddhism, using the idea of translation between places as a framework. We are doing this in order to consider what it is in material culture terms that is important for constructing and recognising a major Buddhist site. To do this, we use a comparative methodology to explore similarities and differences between two major Buddhist archaeological and heritage sites, Taxila in Pakistan and Anuradhapura in Sri Lanka. What do we mean by translation in relation to archaeology and material culture? Places and objects of a faith or religion can be seen as a physical translation of the belief systems and the ritual activities that underpin these practices. This is an especially useful approach in archaeology, where it is the places, the objects, the buildings that are recovered and analysed and used as a proxy for the beliefs and practices that are enacted by the actual people involved. Translation can be seen as having multiple elements at work. It is an act of looking for meaning in the material culture that represents the intentions and understandings of those who created and used the places, buildings, objects, and so forth. And translation may also be a means of working through what elements of a faith are deemed sufficiently important, even crucial, when faiths are carried to new places and even new time periods. It can also include ideas about the interpretation or translation of these material remains for a modern audience, often primarily as heritage. And this paper is about the comparison of the material culture of Buddhism in two separate and distinct geographical locations. We employ the concept of translation as a way to think through which elements are constant, which are absent or differently presented, and to use this as a starting point to understand more about the significance of our archaeological information. Well, Gandhara and Taxila need very little introduction to this conference and to this audience. As you all know, Taxila was the major urban centre of Gandhara and was a settlement long before Buddhism was spread by the Emperor Ashoka in the 3rd century BCE. But the advent of Buddhism greatly stimulated the revitalization and growth of the city, turning it into one of the greatest cities of the ancient world. Anuradhapura, located in the north-central province of Sri Lanka, was the first royal capital of the Sinhala kingdom of Rajarata. Like Taxila, settlement here predated the advent of Buddhism, also in the 3rd century BCE, and also fueled by Ashoka's proselytizing. The ancient sacred city itself comprises the royal palace, central citadel, some 5 major monasteries and numerous smaller monasteries, and a number of forest monasteries, as well as major reservoirs or tanks. The temples and monasteries of Anuradhapura cover an area larger than 100 kilometres square, and there are many monuments outside the major royal complexes which remain underexplored and little recorded. Now, Buddha found enlightenment under the Bodhi tree at Bodh in northeastern India. And having the Buddhist nun Sanghamitta, Ashoka's daughter, transport a cutting from the tree at Bodh Gaya to Anuradhapura was a major mark of favour from Ashoka to the king Devanampayatissa and to Sri Lanka itself. The gifting to the island of a cutting from the sacred Bodhi tree at Bodh Gaya was crucial to Anuradhapura consolidating power and longevity as a ruling city, and has been key to the site continuing as a major Buddhist pilgrimage location and sacred city today. And today, the main shrine and focus of worship and pilgrimage at the centre of Anuradhapura is the Sri Mahabodhi. Anuradhapura declined following the South Indian Chola invasions of the medieval period and the subsequent movement of the royal capital to Polonnaruwa in the southeast. So what makes a Buddhist monastery? Well, there are, of course, many differences between Taxila and Anuradhapura, some of which are covered in our written paper. Here we want to think about what makes a Buddhist monastery in terms of structures. We would probably consider key such things as stupas, maybe one or maybe many, image houses, monk cells, chapter house, refectory. These are the elements that we would probably include if asked to describe a typical Buddhist monastery. In relation to Sri Lanka, a Bodhi tree shrine is generally considered essential. In the remainder of this presentation, we want to compare two major monasteries, one each from Taxila and Anuradhapura, and work through similarities and differences with regard to the main structures, and decide which are essential to the being of a monastery in each place. At Taxila, we considered Dharmarajaka, which Marshall claimed was the oldest monastery in the city, linked to Ashoka and thus of the 3rd century BCE. At the centre of the monastery, and physically, visibly and emotionally dominating the site, is the great stupa. The stupa, you can see it here on the slide, right in the centre, very clearly labelled, is approximately circular in plan, some 45 metres in diameter, and it sits on a raised terrace with steps at each of the 4 cardinal points. The extant height of the stupa is given as around about 15 metres, but it has of course been damaged. There is a processional pathway around the stupa and the lower part of a pillar which Marshall suggests would have supported a lion capital. Marshall also describes smaller stupas that encircled the main great stupa, and the presence of multiple small stupas is also known from other Taxila sites such as the Jolian Monastery. These smaller stupas were thought to have been destroyed by an earthquake in the 1st century CE and were followed by a ring of small chapels or places for Buddha images or statues. There are also multiple stupas across the site beyond the central ring. A small tank lined with lime plaster was also uncovered at the site. It would have been accessed by a flight of steps, and Marshall suggested that it was a bathing pool for monks, though it would have been filled in before 2 later stupas of the Kushan period were erected over it. Dani challenges this interpretation, saying that the tank was in the wrong location for a monkish bathing pool. He said they would have used the Tamra stream, and that if it had a ritual significance, it would not have been taken out of use before building the later stupas. Dani argues that the tank may have been used by monastery visitors and lay worshippers for their water needs, and a bathroom is noted in the later Court G area to the north of the site, area of cells. Now, Marshall considers apsidal buildings as almost emblematic of Buddhism, and an apsidal temple or chacha hall is from the Kushan period, and it's described as similar to apsidal chacha halls from Ajanta and Ellora in India, although the Dharmarajaka structure has an octagonal rather than a round interior. Inside the apse area, there is the remains of an octagonal stupa built over an earlier floor, and Marshall notes another apsidal building at Sirkap and Taxila. Very little is known about the refectory and kitchen arrangements at Dharmarajaka, and Marshall suggests that in the early periods such structures would have been constructed from perishable materials, thus little remained to be excavated. Little detail is given of any later structure in their excavations, and this may be a product of the ways in which the vihara was provisioned and supported by the lay population. At Anuradhapura, we use the example of Abhayagiriya, the oldest of the major monasteries in the sacred city, which was conducted in the 2nd century BCE and covers an area of some 200 hectares or 500 acres. Abhayagiriya also has a major stupa at the heart of the complex, and you can see this here on this slide. In this case, the stupa was constructed in the early 1st century BCE with a diameter of some 95 metres and a height of 75 metres, making it somewhere in the region of twice the diameter of the great stupa at Dharmarajaka and considerably more than twice the height. The stupa is surrounded by 2 terraces, one stone paved and one covered in sand. These terraces are then enclosed by a wall. Unlike Dharmarajaka, there is little to suggest multiple stupas or chapels surrounding it, though there are, however, other smaller stupas in different parts of the site. Notable structures linked to bathing and hygiene at Abhayagiriya include the so-called Elephant Pond, which is a massive human-made pond, some 159 metres long, 53 metres wide and 9.5 metres deep. There are steps in the middle of each side wall, and the pond has numerous underground conduits and sluices controlling water supply. For various reasons, more recent scholars are disinclined to think that this was actually a pond used for bathing elephants, and much more likely to be a pleasure bathing place or a ritual bathing place. There is also the Jantagara, or sanitary complex, which comprises toilets, carved urinals, and bathing areas with wastewater drains and stone conduits supplying water and linked to the equivalent of septic tanks for the use of the monks. The twin ponds, Kotumpakuna, are 2 decorative or bathing ponds built from dressed stone slabs. The larger is 40 metres by 15 metres, and the smaller is 28 metres by 15 metres, and both are 4 metres deep. The ponds are accessed by steps in the shorter size that have carved stone railings, and the pillars at the top of each set of stones are adorned with urns of plenty. The twin ponds were also constructed with a sophisticated water supply system permitting control of water levels, drainage, and filtering. Thus, at Abhayagiriya, it is very possible to see that a lot of investment was made into water control and ponds and tanks within the monastic area. Now, Kulatunga and Amarasaka note that a small refectory area, kitchen and storage, at Abhayagiriya has been excavated in one of the many residential areas within the monastery. One of the most striking features is the massive stone trough or stone boat, which has been calculated to have the capacity to hold some 5,000 alms bowls of rice. This permanent fixture is thought to have been used either to hold cooked rice for the meals for the monks or to hold uncooked rice. Regardless, it is clearly a significant feature in monastic life in Sri Lanka. Now, while apsidal buildings are known at Anuradhapura, they appear only in the late Anuradhapura period, that is the 7th to 10th century CE, and then only in the outer monasteries of the city, the forest monasteries that were home to the Pamsakulan sect of monks. One of the most important and sacred places in the monastery was the Bodhigara, believed to have housed the first Bodhi tree of the Abhayagiriya monastery. A Bodhigara is a roofed structure encircling a Bodhi tree, and the Sri Mahabodhi, or sacred Bodhi tree, at the Mahavihara at Anuradhapura that we saw on an earlier slide is a good living example. Now, the sacred tooth relic was brought to Sri Lanka in the 4th century CE and was first housed in Abhagiriya, where it was on public display according to Chinese pilgrims. Tooth temples, like Bodhgaya's, are an intrinsic part of Sri Lankan Buddhism. The sacred tooth relic is closely linked to royal power and legitimacy. So the presence of the sacred tooth at Abhagiriya was not only a great honour, it also marked out Abhagiriya as one of the most powerful and prestigious institutions in the island. So there are many similarities between Dharmarajaka and Abhagiriya, not least the presence of a massive stupa that dominates the monastery. The stupas signify a close link to Ashoka and the major spread of Buddhism that accompanied his conversion, and thus convey a strong sense of authenticity, of early awareness of the power of this now state-sanctioned religion in both places. The size of both stupas also sends a forceful message, not just of the desire to commemorate the Buddha, but also to show that monasteries had power and wealth. The Sangha was ostensibly about prayer, meditation, and living a simple life supported by lay worshippers, but in reality, this was an incredibly powerful social and political structure with burgeoning wealth on a great scale. In the area of water features and monastic ablution, it is also possible to draw out some differences. In addition to the multiple ponds around the monastery, excavations at Abhagiriya also uncovered a Jantagar, or sanitary complex. This complex had sophisticated water management systems to allow flowing water, drainage and waste removal, and it is clear that a lot of planning and effort went into both personal bathing and the creation of water features, for pleasure as well as possibly the promotion of peace and tranquility. A tank was excavated at Dharmarajaka, which Marshall believed could have been used for bathing by monks. However, this tank was then partially covered by the construction of two later stupas, putting it out of use. And Dani argues that this was never a bathing tank for monks, but he believed they would have used the Tamara stream, which was closer to their accommodations. The apsidal building at Dharmarajaka also stands out as a structure present in Gandhara monasteries, but not in Anuradhapura monasteries. Marshall notes similarities to other monastic sites in northern India and considers apsidal buildings important in early Buddhism in the region, and apsidal buildings, of course, have been recorded elsewhere at Taxila. It might well then be possible to suggest that this is part of a northern tradition that only reaches Sri Lanka in the medieval period, and then is used in forest monasteries. This could be a good area to explore further to understand more about the spread of architecture of faith in different periods. Another area to reflect on is the importance of Bodhi trees in Anuradhapura and Sri Lanka more generally. There is a Bodhi tree at Taxila, but was planted in the 1960s in the grounds of the Taxila Museum. This does not make it any less interesting, but it is not an element of the material culture of Buddhism in the city itself. The other major difference is the presence of a tooth temple at Abhagiriya and at other royal sites across Sri Lanka. Tooth temples have been identified primarily through historical accounts, but there has been little in the way of archaeological deconstruction of what makes a tooth temple distinguishable from other temples in the archaeological record. Now, to return to the idea of translation of faith and the role this might play in furthering archaeological understandings, we would argue that this concept has relevance for Buddhism and the two case studies covered in this presentation, and potentially in many other situations. We believe it is useful to think about how faiths might be translated between different places as people and ideas often move considerable distances. In the examples of Gandhara and Sri Lanka, Buddhism was a faith promulgated by Ashoka and taken to specific geographical locations, as witnessed by multiple material and historical records, including the Ashokan edicts across vast areas of North and South Asia. As archaeologists, we turn to material culture to understand how faith might be spread or translated from one area to another, and what elements are critically fundamental and what is critical in any given place. Here we have considered two monasteries in two very different urban spaces and geographical locations, but both are closely linked to the early proselytization of Ashoka. Both are translations from the Buddhist heartland to the periphery of the Ashokan world of the concepts of Vihara and Sangha, arguably the two vehicles that were fundamental to the successful spread of Buddhist faith. The structures at Taxila and Anuradhapura can be viewed as working translations of the central ideology taken into different regions. This translation rests on the material culture, in this case structures, being created and then used and modified as part of living faith, as part of the ritual and other activities taking place in and around sacred places. That translation works across regions and countries, rests on both faith and translation being ongoing, dynamic and creative processes. Neither faiths themselves nor places of faith are static. Why carry out such a comparison? Well, we strongly believe that in order to understand more about the ways in which people enacted their faiths, archaeologists need to do more than record buildings and sites. If archaeologists do want to learn more about faith in the past, about emotion and belief, and how these things are translated into practice and ritual, then we need to ask questions such as what makes something Buddhist? And using the concept of translation alongside a comparative methodology is one way of beginning to access material that helps us begin to address such questions. Thank you very much.
Very much. We continue with a paper by Dr. B. Wu from Gandhara to China, the transformed journey of the Buddhist incense burner.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Wu Bi, a doctoral candidate from the University of Chinese Academy of Social Science. Today, I am honored to present my research on a fascinating case of cross-cultural visual translation in Buddhist art. This study examines how a Central Asian fire altar image was transformed into the Chinese Boshan censer or Boshan Lu on Buddhist pedestals during the Northern and the Southern dynasties. Okay, look at these four images. On the left is the well-known fasting Buddha. We can see a fire altar at the center of the pedestal. On the right is a Northern dynasty's pedestal with a Boshan censer. Visually, they occupy the same ritual position. Structurally, they both feature a high stem and a central container. But here is a puzzle. Are they directly connected through transmission, or is just a coincidence? Scholars have offered two opposing views. Western scholars like Jessica Rawson argue that the Boshan Lu form came from West Asia. Meanwhile, most East Asian scholars simply call the censer on Chinese Buddha pedestals Boshan Lu, implicitly claiming it is Chinese in origin. Both positions are trapped in a linear either-or model of transmission, neither fully explains this complex cultural phenomenon. So, to move beyond this binary, I propose an analytical framework called heterologous isomorphism. Two premises. First, heterologous acknowledges different origins. The Gandharan object likely emerged from West Asian fire altars and Hellenistic censers, while the Boshan Lu grew out of the Han Chinese cult of the immortal Penglai Mountains. Second, isomorphism refers to structural similarities in form and function. Both occupy the ritual center and both use fire or smoke to communicate with the secret. Okay. Let's first examine the Gandharan object. On Buddha pedestals from the Kushan period, a fixed schema appears. A central vessel with donuts or lines symmetrically arranged on both sides. This vessel typically has an open bowl, a columnar stem, and a stepped base. Unlike practical censers, the lid is omitted and replaced by rising flames. This shift suggests the artisans were not copying specific objects but highlighting the ritual act of kindling fire. The Gandharan object is a hybrid. Its external form derives from Hellenistic standing censers, like this bronze example from the Metropolitan Museum, but its ritual logic comes from different sources. The West Asian fire altar, in which the sacred fire occupies the ritual center. Gandhara, as a part of Kushan Empire, stood at a cultural crossroads. Its artisans created a hybrid that was neither purely Hellenistic nor purely Persian, but uniquely Gandharan. But did Gandharan Buddhism simply adopted Zoroastrian fire worship? No. In Hindu traditions, including later Buddhism, fire already carried meanings of purification and transcendence. The Ekatarika Agama says, among sacrifices, fire is supreme. Is 慈祀火为上, in Chinese. So when the fire altar entered Buddhist art, it was smoothly reinterpreted as an offering vessel. What was inherited was not a theology but a mature visual ritual model, central offering, sacred medium, symmetric worship. Now we shift to Han China. The Gandharan object is flame-centered and open, but the Boshan-lu is mountain-censored with a lid perforated to let smoke rise like mist around an immortal peak. The origins could not be more different, but the structural position of the Boshan-lu in ritual space, central, elevated, mediating between human and divine, is remarkably similar. This similarity is the precondition for visual transition. What did Boshan-lu mean to the Han Chinese? The mountain was not merely a landscape, it was a dwelling place of immortals and a crucial node connecting heaven and earth. In sense, smoke was understood as a manifestation of qi, the vital energy that constitutes the universe. When smoke rose through the mountain peaks and dissipated upward, it visually enacted the soul's essence and the possibility of transcendence after death. The Boshan-lu was a working model of immortality in effect. Now we come to the synthesis. During the northern and southern dynasties, Chinese artisans replaced the Gandharan fire altar with the Boshan-lu. They kept the Gandharan schema, center, symmetry, donuts, but filled it with a native form. The Boshan-lu on Buddha pedestals evolved from simple beginnings in the early 5th century to complex, highly decorated forms by the late 5th and early 6th centuries. By the Eastern Wei and Northern Qi, the full program emerged, a central Boshan-lu flanked by donuts, paired lines, Central Asians, strong men, and heavenly kings. So here are some examples, different sorts of Boshan-lu. from Eastern Wei and Northern Qi and Northern Zhou dynasties. Okay, why did this synthesis happen? I propose 3 mechanisms. The first mechanism is formal resemblance. Both the Gandharan fire altar and the Boshanlu share a basic visual grammar, a central elevated vessel. To Chinese artisans seeing this foreign altar for the first time, it didn't look entirely alien. The open bowl and high stem could be recognized as a kind of censer. They interpreted it as a deformed censer, a little strange but still a censer. This recognition was the cognitive precondition for its replacement. The second mechanism is conceptual. When Buddhism first arrived, it didn't have an independent religious identity. The Chinese understood the Buddha as a kind of immortal or xian in Chinese, and Buddha images appeared alongside Xi Wang Mu on banyan trees and soul jars or bronze mirrors. In this syncretic environment, the Boshanlu's original function, communicating with immortals and achieving transcendence, could be naturally transferred to the Buddhist context. Meanwhile, Buddhist Mount Sumeru, the cosmic center, conceptually overlapped with the sacred mountain imagery of the Boshanlu. A Tang-era text describes a Buddhist temple with a mountain Sumeru adorned with Xian and Buddha images, clearly a Boshanlu in Buddhist guise. The third mechanism is institutional. In the 4th century, the monk Dao An formalized the walking incense and seated sutra lecturing, or 行香法 in Chinese, ceremony. By the northern dynasties, this practice had spread to the imperial court. Historical records tell us that the Emperor Jing of Eastern Wei rode in a carriage performing the walking incense ritual, while his powerful minister Gao Huan followed on foot, holding an incense burner. This shows that the incense burner was not merely symbolic. It was a functioning ritual implement in a real liturgical performance. This institutional context explains why the censer, not another object, occupied the center of Buddhist pedestals. So, what's my core argument? This is not a case of linear transmission from West Asia to China. Rather, Gandhara first created a hybrid sacred center schema. Then, centuries later, Chinese artisans recognized the structural similarity between that schema and their own Boshanlu tradition. They strategically substituted the Boshanlu into the Gandharan schema. The result was a new visual tradition, Buddhist in ritual function, but deeply Chinese in its visual form and symbolism. As for the theoretical implications, this case challenges traditional models of artistic influence. It shows that cross-cultural transmission is not about passive copying, but active recontextualization. The receiver here, Chinese artisans played a creative role. They recognized structural resonance, selected appropriate native forms, and created something new. I suggest cultural translation as a useful lens for studying such processes. Translation usually is not perfect reproduction, it involves loss, gain, and creative transformation. Okay, let me conclude. The Gandharan sacred object was already a hybrid, Hellenistic in form, West Asian in ritual logic. The Boshan was rooted in an entirely different cosmology, immortal mountains and the flow of qi. When Buddhism entered China, artisans didn't simply copy the foreign altar. They recognized a structural isomorphism between the two traditions and strategically substituted the Boshan into the Gandharan schema. The result was a new visual tradition that served Buddhist ritual but spoke in a deeply Chinese visual language. This is what I call recontextualization. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Much indeed. This brings us to the last paper of this session by Dr. Teach Huong Yen. The title is From Gandhara to the Mekong Delta, the transmission of early Buddhist iconography to Vietnam.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, venerable, distinguished scholar, dear colleagues. It be very honest to be here today. I come from Vietnam, and I will introduce for one topic from Gandhara to Mekong Delta, the transmission of early Buddhist iconography to Vietnam. And in this paper, I will mention very clear from the ancient time. In Vietnam, we have received influence Buddhist iconography from Gandhara. And I will study one case, one Buddha. We recently recognized a national treasure by Vietnam Buddhist Prime Minister recently. From this map, we have seen very clear in early time, Martin children had begun from Gandhara. They had come from this side before come to China. They had stopped one very important point in Vietnam. That is explained why the Buddha iconography had existed in Vietnam. And in my study, I will focus on Buddhist art in Vietnam, traditional view as a byproduct in the organization via Gupta or Ambarati school. However, archaeology evidence from our culture in Mekong Delta revealed us more complex linkage. This paper that sees that visual DNA of the Gandhara school were transmitted via Martin Seuros living foundation mark in early Vietnamese iconography, especially to My Lai wooden Buddha. My Lai wooden Buddha is a Buddha we have found in the My Lai. So right now we call it just Buddha in My Lai Buddha. So very proper name. Through formal and material analysis of Lai Mi wooden Buddha, this study demonstrates how Hellenistic naturalism could adapt into localized Southeast Asia architects. Transition from artistic tradition to Indus into organized media of Mekong. And the Buddha we have found from this area, very important point in the merchant route, sea route from Gandhara into Vietnam from this area. And in Vietnam, we have one term referring to this merchant Shiros. So they calling for high low luo. It means the one Shiro connected from Gandhara into Vietnam. They calling a proper name, separate proper name in Vietnam. And this Meritai, they begin very early morning in the Buddha time. Even in the Vinaya Pitaka, we have very clear evidence suggests that in the training retreat, the Buddha allow monk if he in a ship for overseas. So the Buddha allow him to stay for 3 months during the training retreat in the ship. So we have from beginning monk, they have began travel from this area to area, even by ship overseas. And also from this area, we have found a lot of items related to Crete, and especially related to Gandhara. These are items we have found and right now in the National Museum in Vietnam. And this is one bit of the Lord Buddha from Gandhara style. So I will mention in my paper for Namo Buddha's status. And in Vietnam, we don't one of the big thing change from Gandhara to Vietnam. They don't have stone because here they Mekong Delta, so they don't have stone. So they had made a very big wood to make a Buddha statue, very different to another place. Very big tree you have made for the major Buddha statues. And after nearly for 2,000 years, what we have right now, only one completed the Buddha statue from Vietnam right now in National Museum. I will show later. And this is a Buddha from the local artist. You have seen the Buddha from the Buddhist monk. They bring along with them in the trip from Gandhara to Southeast Asia, then to China. So the artists, local, they beginning to study the form of the Buddha statues. And this one they calling for Namo Buddha statue is one of the most ancient treasure dating back to 4th to 5th, 6th century and reserved as primary representation of the oak elk culture. On October 2012, you're recognized by Prime Minister of Vietnam. They became a national treasure, and right now they keep in National Museum in Ho Chi Minh City. And this is very, very big Buddha statue with 2 meters tall and 1.5 meters wide. The statue was carved from a single block, Thai wood, or sometimes they call a mu u in Vietnam. It features the Buddha in standing position into 2-tier lotus parallel with a diameter around 41 centimeters. From upper tier consists of multi-layer of alternate cultural pendant with a central piston forming the base, and lower tier features a downward facing lotus base with 2-layer pentel cut into a cylindrical foundation. And the head of the statue was crowned with a point protrusion on the top known as Unisa, very popular in Vietnam because from the Thai, in Japan we have only for sitting Buddha. From the Thai we have standing Buddha, and they recognize that from Gandhara, but they don't know another school from Amarati school of India. They don't, because they don't have. And one explain why in the standing Buddha in the lotus, because in Vietnam, in the same in India, lotus is a national flower. The artists they have observed and made a lotus flower under the seat of the Buddha. This one, the typical value, the Buddha statue came from a single trunk, Thai wood or a mu'u, with a typical of earlier South Asia Buddhist sculpture during the first century of the Khmer area belong to oak elm culture. The statue is lies inside with a high aesthetic value representative of oak elm culture, and in particular is remarkable for being preserved intact to this day. Lời mi Buddha served as an article of iconography synthesis that defined the early Buddhist period. South Asia, recalled from the 11th of Dongta province and this to 4 to 6 century. The masterwork of oak elm culture provide a physical record of visual DNA transmitted from Gandhara Horseland to Mekong Delta. And second point of this, the Buddha is carved from a single and a very much block statue remark of profound technology and attribute from the latest tradition of North with India. In Gandhara, sculpture analyze a planet nature great treat to very creative. So different here. From Gandhara, we have 4 great street for tone, but in Vietnam this area is dental Mekong Delta, so they made a very big tree for the Buddha statue, very high in nearly for 2 meters and very heavy, around 100 kilo right now in a museum. And this statue of oak elms, because from this period in Vietnam we have one proper name of local people. We call it for oak elm culture because they have study from India, from Gandhara. They had formed new for this for culture, and also from this Thai we have formed a new tradition in Vietnam for making for Buddha statue. We have a web drapery. Different with Gandhara. We have in Gandhara we have very heavy, strong weaponry, but in Vietnam we have a web. It means this robe of the monk is covered with the body. So we from this study we have so very clear from the early day from Gandhara we have very good connection with South Asia country, especially in Vietnam, and then we come to China. And we can see here from this side we can see the face of the Buddha. Also, especially we have mentioned very clear Unisha from this of the Buddha. Because in the part we have mentioned in Vietnam we have only for sitting Buddha, only standing Buddha for Amitabha Buddha, only for standing Buddha. A majority of artists they made only sitting Buddha. From this Thai, from under our culture, they beginning to mark for standing Buddha, and especially for very high in this Unisha from this they study from Gandhara Buddhist school. And from this, my field study, I very strong confidence that Gandhara Buddhist School had very influence in Mekong Delta. Because recently, when we come to study, we have surprised discover these two Buddha in this area. But they don't know, even local people, they don't know it's a Buddha. They put same like this. They put same because so many stone, so they keep in one side, then Buddha from Gandhara, directly from Gandhara, they have keep in this place. So from this, I have strongly believe from early time of Vietnam, we have very strong connection with Gandhara Buddhist School. And from this, I conclude for Mekong Delta at a global synthesis, because transmission of early Buddhist iconography from rich Buddhist heartland of Gandhara to Mekong Delta stand as testament and cosmopolitan nature of Asian work. And second point here, for my conclusion, is with formation material analysis of Loimi Buddha good. This study has demonstrated that of our culture were not a passive recipient of Indonesia, but an authentic agent in trans culture, authentic exchange. And finally, by regenerated DNA, it means the artist, they had seen the Buddha, so they had made a Buddha for themselves and for the local. Manifest high nature bridge over physical structure and synthetic rapidly. So I have made very clear about this point rapidly, because they have separate different with another school, while simulated innovation through the yield of Indonesian material, they yield only for Mu'u, one of a local plant in Vietnam and in Southeast Asia. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Before we open the floor to questions, let us have another attempt to play the video message by Professor Olivieri. Okay.
A warm welcome to all participants at this international conference, the third conference on the Buddhist Heritage of Pakistan, held at the Quaid-e-Azam University in Islamabad. A special welcome to the scholars, the organizers, and everyone on the behalf of the Italian Archaeological Mission in Pakistan, which I direct, I would like to thank you for dedicating a session to Giuseppe Tucci, the founder of our archaeological mission, which last year marked 70 years of uninterrupted activity. Today, as in the past, we are engaged in numerous excavation, research and publication activities, and I hope you will have the opportunity to visit the ongoing excavations at Barikot and other sites in Swat, as well as the new excavation at Sirsa, Taxila KP, where archaeological research has resumed after more than a century of silence. This is now possible thanks to the new Khyber Path project, implemented like all our activities in full collaboration with the Directorate General of Archaeology and Museums of the Government of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, to whom we extend our deepest gratitude for all they have done and continue to do to protect the cultural heritage of ancient Buddhism in Pakistan. Giuseppe Tucci's role in the study of Indian and Himalayan Buddhism, stemming from his extended stays and expeditions in India, Nepal, and Tibet, both before and immediately after the Second World War, is internationally recognized and needs no further emphasis. Given that the conference will focus extensively on manuscripts, it will be worth briefly recounting the role Tucci played in saving important manuscripts from Gilgit from being lost. These were stored in the Bunji archives near Gilgit and were taken from there by a colonel during the First Kashmir War. Having learned of their existence and of the attempt to sell them abroad, Tucci, in agreement with F.A. Khan, the great first director of the Department of Archaeology and Museums of Pakistan, acquired them and immediately made them available to the Karachi Museum, where they remain to this day. He then obtained permission to take them to Italy for a short time to carry out their conservation and documentation. But as soon as they returned to Pakistan, the manuscripts, in agreement with the Department of Archaeology, were published in a substantial series of joint editions, first by Edward Conze and then by Raniero Gnoli in the famous Serie Orientale Roma of Dismeo. Tucci's choice was particularly fortunate and far-sighted, bearing in mind, for example, that other folios had instead been dispersed and sold to museums in Great Britain even before the Second World War. Tucci's attention to the legal and ethical aspects of archaeological research must be emphasized here. I concluded this message by sharing with you some of the points through which Tucci demonstrated in practice this attitude of care, respect, and sharing. What should be emphasized here is Tucci's foresight in laying the foundation for the activities of the Italian Archaeological Mission in Pakistan. First and foremost, this was thanks to the diplomatic and legislative solution that extended the scope of the Pakistani law on archaeological heritage and activities to the Swat region as early as 1955-1956, when Swat was a princely state, a solution that resolved the dilemma which had plagued early British archaeological research and service in the region. Apart from the acquisition of that portion of the Gilgit manuscripts, there is another question somewhat connected to the previous two. In 1976, exports of archaeological materials to the National Museum of Oriental Art in Rome, provided by the law then in force in Pakistan, were unilaterally halted by Tucci with foresight. The rationale behind this decision was the concept that heritage should remain its countries of origin. In hindsight, it was a courageous and ahead of its time decision. This was Giuseppe Tucci, a scholar and a tenacious defender of the cultural heritage of the country that awarded him the highest civil honor, the Hilal-e-Imtiaz Pakistan. Thank you very much, and Pakistan.
Absentia for this wonderful message. We are running a little bit late, but I think we do have maybe 5 minutes for question and answers from the audience before our concluding session. So please, any questions on any of the papers we just heard? I see a hand in the back there.
Thank you for wonderful presentations. So the first question is about the first presentation that Dr. Jung has discussed about the transmission of Buddhism to the China. So the most important, he has mentioned about the Silk Road. So when we talk about the Silk Road, how it connects the South Asia with Central Asia and then Central Europe, Afghanistan has an important role in it. It's a hub for connecting civilizations. So why the majority of scholars, when they discuss about the Buddhism and its role, they ignore Afghanistan in this context. So when we talk about the Silk Road and connectivity, regional connectivity, so these are important to be mentioned, that how we can connect, not only in the broader perspective. And the second question is about talked about the structural similarities. There are structural similarities, but we should also know about the aesthetics differences. Because if we see in Afghanistan, in Harda, their architecture is completely different from the eastern south in Logar, Misainak. Then if we go to the Bamyan, they have different aesthetics. So it's very important to be mentioned that how they have different aspects. And the final question of mine is from the whole panel, if you don't mind, including the chair, Stefan. So could we understand the Buddhism as it become hegemonic project nowadays, a market-oriented program? So could we understand this Buddhism without the social, economic, political, geopolitical, and geoeconomics aspect of that time, and how we can revive that? Could we do it or not? Thank you.
You got the first.
Okay. That's very interesting question, but I don't think I can answer you directly because I actually haven't mastered so many and enough archaeological evidence to rebut such evidence chain. So your question, I think maybe I should look for more ancient literature evidence to support my opinion. Thank you. Okay.
And I mean, of course, just very briefly, I mean, Buddhism is a very complex phenomenon that may be rooted in spirituality, of course, but then also became a social and institutional force. It was involved, you know, it connected with the secular world. As you said, I mean, sort of marketing aspects, of course, also played a role. So, of course, I mean, all these have to be considered. And I think in this panel we had actually a nice cross-section of these various aspects, you know, of this complex phenomenon of Buddhism. And, of course, you're completely right that Afghanistan plays a very central role in the transfer of Buddhism from Gandhara into Central Asia. Thank you.
I have a question for Reverend and Dr. Shi. And you talk about the Binaya, how Binaya, the manuscript of Binaya from Gandhara area, including Swat, transmitted to China. And in the beginning of Foguoji, Fa Xian wrote very clearly his primary purpose, traveling to Gandhara, he called it Northern India, was to seek Binaya, because Binaya in China was incomplete and poorly translated. But when he reached Udiana and northern India, and he found that all the Binaya there were transmitted orally from master to disciple. He could not find any written text of Binaya, so he could copy it. So he had to travel to Middle India to get Binaya. You know, earlier, Professor Dr. Baum also talked about Binaya. You all talk about, so you have found in your acquired manuscript, you have found the text of Binaya exactly? Because you say it's very early, even early before Fa Xian was here. So can you explain that, or Mr. Baum, you can?
Well, we understand that archaeology excavation, right, in the different period, they found the manuscript, yeah, based on the local context. So initially, when Buddha established the Sangha order and also the Vinaya, the precepts, they imposed to the Sangha order, actually it is not in one shot. In one shot, 250 precepts to all the monastery. So it established the precepts one by one according to the incident that happened, this first thing. And secondly, at first, the Vinaya that imposed in the Sangha order is in practice, in their daily life, not in written, but it is in oral basis. Yeah. Until that we found that it's been written in the Bilspa, then only we discovered that, oh, that is the Vinaya written in Kharosthi script. And also we found it in 1st century. Yeah. So Stephen is the expert, so I need him to explain, to share.
I can just add very briefly that yes, we do have in the so-called Bajau collection, which may actually be from Afghanistan, yes, and is connected to the scrolls here in the Islamabad Museum. So we do have 2 manuscripts. One has 2 extracts from Pratimokshas with unclear school affiliation, but some Sarvastivada and Kashyapya affinities. And we have another manuscript with extracts from Kamavachana. So exactly as you said, date 1st, 2nd century maybe, since they were looted and not excavated. We have no contextual information, and we have to base this dating on the paleography. We have no physical access, so no radiocarbon dating could be performed, but 1st or 2nd century certainly. And the good news is that Ingo Strauch's full book-length edition of these will be published later this year by my project in Munich with Heidelberg Asian Studies Press. And it will be online, in fact, available to all. So that's the good news.
Hello and good afternoon. My question is from Mr. Ruby. This was a very comprehensive presentation about the incense burners or fire altars or Boshanlu at China. So before its depiction in the art of Gandhara, in the Buddhist art of Gandhara or the Boshanlu at the Chinese art, these incense burners or fire altars, they appear on the monumental relief carvings at Persepolis, which is in ancient Persia or the present day Iran. Because at that time, Gandhara was part of the Achaemenid Empire during the 6th century BCE. So the inspiration came from all the way from Iran or Persia to Gandhara. So we see these Persian influences on the Buddhist art of Gandhara. Because fire was very sacred during at the time of Achaemenid, because of Zoroastrianism, it was prevailing over there, their religion. So I just wanted to add this to your presentation. I hope you understand it.
Right. Thanks for your information. Right. In fact, that is the field that for future research in depth, because there are so many facts or evidence that that are hidden, or unexplored, or unexplained, or uninterpreted. Yeah, and including the route of the Silk Road. Yeah. So if you have interest, you're welcome to join our HPRC in this project. Thank you.
With that, it may be time to move on, so I hereby conclude the last session of papers at this wonderful conference and congratulate the organizers, congratulate all of you, and we move on to the closing ceremony. Thank you very much.
Just before moving towards the closing ceremony, request the chair to distribute the conference souvenir to our presenters, please. Now I request Director HBRC to present the conference souvenir to our chair, Stephen Baums. It's okay. It's always more. Okay, now we now move towards the closing ceremony of the Third International Conference on the Buddhist Heritage of Pakistan. We now begin this session with the recitation of the Holy Quran and the Buddhist Sutra, symbolizing the harmony. Recitation. No, it's not working. All right. So we now begin this session, and before we start, I want our guest to be seated on the stage. First, I request Mr. Aftabur Rahman Rana, MD PTDC, to be seated on the stage, our guest of honor. Now I request Venerable Ju Chen to join Mr. Aftabur Rahman Rana, MD PTDC, on the stage. And now our guest will be accompanied by Director HBRC, Dr. Ghaniur Rahman. We now begin this session with the recitation from the Holy Quran and the Buddhist Sutra, symbolizing harmony, peace, and mutual respect among cultures and traditions. To recite a few verses from the Holy Quran, I request Mr. Hayatullah to come to the stage and recite the verses from the Holy Quran.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الرحمن علم القرآن خلق الإنسان علمه البيان الشمس والقمر بحسبان والنجم والشجر يسجدان والسماء رفعها ووضع الميزان ألا تطغوا في الميزان وأقيموا الوزن بالقسط ولا تخسروا الميزان والأرض وضعها للأنام فيها فاكهة والنخل ذات الأكمام والحب ذو العصف والريحان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان خلق الإنسان من صلصال كالفخار وخلق الجان من مارج من نار فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان رب المشرقين ورب المغربين فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان مرج البحرين يلتقيان بينهما برزخ لا يبغيان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان يخرج منهما اللؤلؤ والمرجان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان وله الجوار المنشآت في البحر كالأعلام فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان آمنت بالله صدق الله مولانا العظيم.
Now for the recitation of the Buddhist Sutra, I invite Venerable Yu Dan.
Namo Buddhaya Namo Shakyamuni Buddhaya Namo Shakyamuni while contemplating the prajna paramita profoundly, realized that the five skandhas are empty, and thus he was able to overcome all suffering. Sariputra, form is not different from emptiness. Emptiness is not different from form. Form is in fact emptiness, and emptiness is in fact form. This also applies to feeling, perception, volitions, and consciousness. Sariputra, emptiness is the nature of all dhammas. It can neither be created nor annihilated, polluted nor cleansed, increased nor decreased. Therefore, in emptiness there is no form, feeling, perception, volitions, or consciousness, no eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, or mind, or form, sound, smell, taste, touch, or conception, no object of sight, and no consciousness, no ignorance, nor its extinction, no aging, and no death, nor their cessation, no suffering causes cessation, nor the path, no wisdom, no attainment, as there is nothing to attain. A Bodhisattva who realizes on the prajna paramita has neither worry nor obstruction. Without worry and obstruction there is no fear, away from confusion and daydreaming, and thus reaches Nirvana. Buddhas of the past, present, and future also rely on the prajna paramita to attain supreme enlightenment. Thus one should know that the prajna paramita is the great mantra, the mantra of illumination, and the supreme of all mantras. It is an unequal mantra and able to extirpate all suffering. This is true and not false. Thus, in programming the prajna paramita mantra, one say gatte gatte para gatte para samgatte buddhi swaha. I take refuge in the Buddha, wishing that all sentient beings understand the Dharma and make the supreme vow. I take refuge in the Dharma, wishing that all sentient beings study the sutra diligently and obtain an notion of wisdom. I take refuge in the Sangha, wishing that all sentient beings lead the masses in harmony without obstructions. May kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity pervade all worlds. May we cherish and build affinities to benefit all beings. May chant pure land and precepts inspire equality and patience. May May this conference unfold with wisdom and harmony, bringing fruitful exchanges and meaningful insights. May auspicious blessings be with each of you, guiding your endeavors and enriching your journey ahead. Namo Buddhaya.
Thank you, Venerable Yudang. I request Venerable Yudang to be seated with our guest on stage, please. We are honored to have Venerable Ju Chen with us, and now I would request Venerable Ju Chen to give her remarks on the 3rd International Conference on the Buddhist Heritage of Pakistan.
Yeah, very good afternoon to everyone. And distinguished guest, Mr. Aftab ur Rehman, Rana, Managing Director, Pakistan Tourism Development Corporation, and also Dr. Ghani, and all the professors, and all of you are my good friends. Yeah, yesterday until today, we heard a lot of our scholars who presented their papers to all the participants and all the volunteers, and all of us feel very, very happy and feel that very touched after read and see one specialist, your presentations. Then I think only 2 days, but we are very fruitful for this our event. First is our inauguration of the Center of Humanistic Buddhism Research Center in Quaid-e-Azam University. That means this is your second home. Welcome, all of you. Always come back here. And also, second, the paper presentation by world-class scholars has deepened our understanding of our Gandhara culture. Everyone is very much looking forward to coming here, especially from yesterday, my Facebook, my line, WhatsApp. I sent all the pictures, all our, the very touch pictures to all the world. You know, our Fuguang-san is not only in Taiwan or China, in Canada, American, Africa, and Malaysia, Singapore, anyway. So everyone are very touched and say, wow, we want to have a group to visit our Gandhara site and also visit Pakistan. So I think our tourism department will become